Hi everyone, my name is Jarod Lopez, and today I will talk to you about the chapter number 3 of Principles of Language Learning and Teaching, Age and Acquisition. First, to talk about this topic, this chapter of the book, we need to dispel some myths because it's important to dispel some myths about the relationship between the first and second language acquisition, in order to avoid confusion in those who want to learn another language, or even in those who has grown knowledge about the topic. The first step in investigating Asian education might be to dispel some myths, as I said before, because it's important to avoid this confusion. First, in language teaching, we must practice and practice again and again. Just watch a small child learning his mother tongue. He repeats things over and over again during the language learning stage. He practices all the time. This is what we must also do when we learn a foreign language. Language learning is mainly a matter of imitation. You must be a mimic. Just like a small child, he imitates everything. And first, we practice the separate sounds, then words, then sentences, and that is the natural order of and is therefore right for learning a foreign language. What's a small child speech development? First, he listens, then he speaks. Understanding always precedes speaking. Therefore, this must be the right order of representing the skills in a foreign language. Then a small child listens and speaks, and no one would dream of making him read or write. Speaking and writing are advanced stages of language development. These are just some myths of Asian acquisition, and there are a lot of myths. There are more and more, but these are some of those. Now, the types of comparison and contrast. The comparison of first and second language acquisition can easily be oversimplified. At the very least, one needs to approach the comparison by first considering the differences between children and adults, and it is, in one sense, illogical to compare the first language acquisition of a child with the second language acquisition of an adult. This involves trying to draw analogies not only between first and second language learning situations, but also between children and adults. It is much more logical to compare first and second language learning in children, or to compare second language learning in children and adults. Nevertheless, child first language acquisition and adult second language acquisition are more common and important categories of acquisition to compare. It is reasonable, therefore, to view the latter type of comparison within a matrix of possible comparisons. And as you can see in this chart, because it represents four possible categories to compare, defined by age and type of acquisition. Note that the vertical shaded area between the child and the adult is purposely brought to account for varying definitions of adulthood. In general, however, an adult is considered to be one who has reached the age of puberty. Now, I will talk about the critical period hypothesis. Well, most discussions about Asian acquisition center on the questions of whether there is a critical period for language acquisition, that that is a biologically determined period of life when language can be acquired more easily, and beyond which time language is increasingly difficult to acquire. The critical period hypothesis, or CPH, claims that there is a such biological timetable, and The classic argument is that a critical point for second language acquisition occurs around puberty, beyond which people seem to be relatively incapable of acquiring a second language. It has led some to assume incorrectly that by the age of 12 or 13 they are over to heal when it comes to the possibility of successful second language learning. Such an assumption must be viewed in the light of what it really means to be successful in learning a second language. Now, the neurological considerations. These are two questions that we have to take into account. How might neurological development affect second language success? And does the maturation of the brain at some stage spell the doom of language acquisition ability? And there are two aspects to take into account here: the hemispheric lateralization and the right hemispheric participation. Why? Well, I will explain you. The hemispheric lateralization. Some researchers have singled out that the lateralization of the brain is the key to answering such a question. There is evidence in neurological researches that as the human brain matures, certain functions are assigned or lateralized to the left hemisphere of the brain, and certain other functions to the right hemisphere. The intellectual, logical, and analytic functions appear to be located in the left hemisphere, while the right hemisphere controls functions related to emotional and social needs. The right hemisphere participation. This hemisphere has an important participation because it's particularly active during the early stages of learning the second language. Yet another branch of neuro-linguistic research focuses on the role of the right hemisphere in the acquisition of a second language. Some researchers noted that in second language learning there is a significant right hemisphere participation, and that this participation is particularly active during the early stages of learning the second language. But this participation to some extent consists of what we will later define as strategies of acquisition. The significance of accent. Most of the evidence indicates that people beyond the age of puberty do not acquire what is called authentic pronunciation of the second language. The fact that given the existence of several hundred muscles that are used in the articulation of some human speech, a tremendous degree of muscular control is required to achieve the fluency of the language. Researches on the acquisition of authentic controls of the phonology of a foreign language supports that notion of a critical period. Most of the evidence indicates that persons beyond the age of puberty do not acquire what is called authentic pronunciation, as I said you before, or native speaker pronunciation of the second language. Possible causes of such an age-based factor have already been discussed, such as the neuromuscular plasticity, cerebral development, sociobiological programs, and the environment of sociocultural influences. There are some cognitive considerations to take into account. Human cognition develops rapidly throughout the first 16 years of life and lives rapidly thereafter. Some cognitive changes are critical, others are more gradual and difficult to detect. And some researchers outline the course of intellectual development in a child through various stages. The first one, the sensory sensorimotor stage, since the birth to 2 years. The second one, the preoperational stage, from ages from 2 to 7 years. The operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and the last one, the formal operational stage. The affective considerations. We as human beings are emotional creatures. and we are often influenced by our emotions. Because as intellectual as we would like to think we are influenced by our emotions. It is only logical then to look at the affective domain for some of the most significant answers to the problems of contrasting the differences between first and second language acquisition. The affective domain includes many factors, such as sympathy, self-esteem, extroversion, inhibition, imitation, anxiety, or attitudes. And the list could go and go on. Some of these may seem at first rather far removed from language learning, but when we consider the pervasive nature of language, any affective factor can conceivably be relevant to second language learning. The bilingualism. First, this means basically learning two separate languages, and the key is to distinguish the separate context for both languages. It is clear that children learn two languages, simultaneously acquire them by the use of similar strategies. They are, in a sense, learning two first languages at the key to success. The key for this to achieve the success of bilingualism, as I said before, is to distinguish the differences, the separate stages and formats to learn these languages. People who learn a second language in such separate contexts can often be described as coordinated bilinguals. They have two meaning systems as opposed to compound bilinguals who have one meaning system from which both languages operate. Children generally do not have problems with mixing up languages, regardless of the separateness of context for the use of the languages. Now, the interference in adults. It's very now known that adults are more vulnerable of the effects of the first language of the second to learn a new language. Now, the interference in adults. It's already known that adults are more vulnerable of the effects of the first language on the second. Adults' second language linguistic processes are more vulnerable to the effect of the first language on the second because, especially the farther apart the two events are, whether adults learning a foreign language in a classroom or out in the arena, they approach the second language either focally or peripherally, systematically too, and they attempt to formulate linguistic rules on the basis of whatever linguistic information is available to them, such as information from the native language, the second language, teacher, classmates, and peers. And that's all for today. So thank you for your attention.